today's video, we'll look at every deck archetype that made it into Day 2 of the Peoria Regional Championships on October 7th and 8th. I will include the highest placing deck list of each type of deck we view today. If you enjoyed today's video, remember to subscribe for more Pokemon TCG content. If you'd like to support my channel, you can do so by using code CELIO5 at PokeCollect.com for a wide selection of sealed products, pre-orders, and unique mystery box items. And use code CELIO at PotownStore.com when shopping for Pokemon TCG Live code cards. Use my affiliate links for Dragon Shield sleeves, which are my favorite card sleeves to use, and Into the AM apparel, where you can find comfortable and passionate clothing. If you have Pokemon TCG bulk lying around, start selling it with ease at tcgbulk.com. And don't forget to stop by PokemonCard.io for deck building, community forums, and news articles. We have over 20 different decks to go over today, so let's get into it. As seen here on the chart, there were 21 deck archetypes that players brought into Day 2, with records of 6-1 or better after the first 9 rounds of tournament play. The event started with over 1,700 players in the Masters division, and 177 of those players made it into Day 2. We've been seeing some of the most diverse and interesting metagames ever with these larger events, and Peoria did not disappoint. Working our way up from the bottom, there were 6 decks which only had 1 placement in Day 2. Starting with Hisuian and Kyogre V-Star, which placed 128th, piloted by Josh De Jesus. This deck is similar to Lost Zone Giratina, but utilizes the toolbox approach more with tech attackers like Zamazenta and Mew EX, and only includes a 2-2 line of Kyogre V-Star. Kyogre V-Star can get a lot of mileage since its rolling iron attack makes it incredibly difficult to take out in one attack, and its Moisture Star ability fully heals itself. I personally think Lost Zone Kyogre is underplayed, and I'd love to see a little more respect for it in this format. Next is Palkia Gardevoir, which Zach Zamora took to 116th place. Zach has been around the game for what feels like forever, and often brings very interesting rogue decks to tournaments. This Palkia Gardevoir deck is an idea that has floated around for a while, but has stayed in the shadows of Tier 3 or rogue deck classification. It utilizes Palkia V-Star Star Portal and Gardevoir Shining Arcana to accelerate energy to its attackers. Notably, this deck includes Kyogre from Celebrations as an endgame strategy, much like the Lost Zone Kyogre decks. Staying on the topic of Palkia V-Star, Callie Moore placed 37th with Palkia Chen-Pao. This Palkia-focused deck uses Chen-Pao as a high-damage attacker once or twice per game, and keeps tempo with Palkia V-Star's efficient damage output. Much like other water variants, this deck plays Cross-Switchers and Canceling Cologne to turn off Manaphy's Wave Veil so that Radiant Greninja can knock out multiple Pokemon at once. Unique about this deck is the Articuno with Wild Freeze, which can completely turn the game around if the opponent can't get out of paralysis. Next is Miraidon EX, notably without Flaffy. While every other Miraidon EX deck in Day 2 played Flaffy, Michael Chikulski placed 120th with this Arven-based approach to the Lightning Toolbox deck. To make up for the lack of Flaffy, Michael played XP Share and Raihan for extra energy acceleration. While the Flaffy build has consistently performed well in this format, it's cool to see a slightly different approach be viable enough to make it into Day 2. There was only one Lost Zone Sablezard deck in all of Day 2, and Terrence Miller took it all the way to top 8. This variant of Lost Zone box omits Radiant Greninja and Mirage Gates for a larger emphasis on Sableye and Cramorant, as well as a strong late-game edition of Radiant Charizard. This has been accepted as the lesser of the Lost Zone box variants, but its top 8 placement at such a large tournament makes me think the deck is still worth considering for major events. Terrence's 3 losses across both days were against Arceus Duraludon, and twice versus the eventual winner of the event, Raymond Long, with Lost Zone Kyogre. Lost Zone Kyogre should be a pretty close matchup since these are both Lost Zone decks with ways to take multiple knockouts per turn, and both playing Roxanne for hand disruption. The final deck with only one player representing it in Day 2 was Charizard EX Gallade. Maximino Mendez placed 157th with Charizard Gallade. His deck list included 1 Luxray and 1 Reversal Energy, which is cool since the Reversal Energy can also be used to attack with Gallade in a pinch. Unfortunately, I do think the lack of representation and the lower placement is in line with this variant of Charizard being outclassed by the others. Next, we have Arceus V-Star with Alolan Vulpix V-Star, which there were 2 of in Day 2. Braden Elfert placed 92nd with a very cool Arceus Alolan Vulpix deck that used Pidgeot EX. Alolan Vulpix V-Star piqued interest going into this event due to its Snow Mirage attack, which prevents damage done to it next turn by Pokemon with abilities, which effectively walls out Charizard EX and Gardevoir EX decks. However, Mew EX can copy Snow Mirage back at Alolan Vulpix V-Star and go through the effect, since Snow Mirage says it goes through all effects. I think Mew EX's release was a huge nerf to Alolan Vulpix V-Star, and we likely won't see any great performances from the card for that reason. Charizard EX Lost Zone showed up twice in Day 2. This Charizard EX variant has had a stigma of being inconsistent surrounding it due to Stage 2 Pokemon and Rare Candy never having much success in a Lost Zone engine deck. Although I do think this variant has potential, its highest placement was 155th, piloted by Kyle Warner. With the Arven variant of Charizard EX seeing so much more play and consistent success now, I think we'll see the numbers dwindle down to 0 for these other Charizard EX variants. There were 3 Arceus Duraludon decks in Day 2, but the shocking part is one of them made it all the way to top 32. Arceus Duraludon had a steep decline in play with the release of Charizard EX and the increased popularity of Giratina V-Star, but that did not stop Ming Wang from placing 27th at Peoria with a very different build of Arceus Duraludon. I saw a tweet from Ming saying they switched their Arceus Giratina deck into an Arceus Duraludon deck, and with that piece of context, I think this deck list begins to make much more sense. I would have imagined that Duraludon VMAX put in a lot of work against unsuspecting Lugia decks with no counter for the Skyscraper ability, but Ming only played against one Lugia deck across both days of the event. Next is Fusion Strike Mew, which has flip-flopped and become the less popular and less successful Mew variant of the weekend, with only 3 making it into Day 2. Devin Feather placed 31st with Fusion Strike Mew VMAX, using a pretty typical list with the notable inclusion being Ice-Q, which has often been overshadowed by Deoxys recently. Fusion Strike Mew seems to adapt to the Charizard EX meta much worse than DTE Mew, but we will get into that later. Speaking of a switcheroo of variants, Single Strike Lugia was the lesser of the 2 Lugia variants in terms of the meta share, with 5 Single Strike Lugias making it into Day 2. Lugia V-Star in general has a poor matchup against Charizard EX variants, so we'll see Cobalion as a tech for the matchup, featured in Billy Chan's 22nd place list. Single Strike Lugia is still very good, but the new flavor of Colorless Lugia took over for the Peoria weekend. We'll have to see moving forward if this is the new normal. On to the 10th most popular deck in Day 2, Inteleon Urshifu. Inteleon Urshifu still struggles with a very polarizing matchup spread, having great matchups against Lost Zone Box and Guardy, but pretty awful matchups against Mew and Lugia. Although 7 players made it into Day 2 with Inteleon Urshifu, its highest placement was only 85th place, piloted by William Hefferman. The meta share for Day 2 of Peoria was very diverse, so this doesn't bode well for a deck like Inteleon Urshifu, which wants to play against the same few decks the whole tournament. We can see here that William lost to Mew VMAX, Colorless Lugia, and 2 Charizards in Day 2. The Charizard EX matchup is close, but not yet comfortable for Inteleon Urshifu. The 9th most popular deck in Day 2 was Lost Zone Kyogre, which ended up being the deck Raymond Long used to win the whole event. Raymond's deck list was a bit different compared to Andrew Estrada's winning Kyogre list from Pittsburgh. Estrada used the hybrid version of Kyogre, which has similarities with the Turbo Lost Zone Box variant, whereas Long used a more Kyogre-focused build, with the only 2 prize Pokemon being Pidgeot V, which can use Forest Seal Stone and then safely send itself back into the deck. Long also notably used Zamazenta from Crown Zenith and include 4 Metal Energy just for this card's Retaliate attack. Across both tournament days, Long only lost 1 match, and that was to Arceus Duraludon. Notably, Long played against 0 Lugia in this tournament, which is historically an awkward matchup for Lost Zone Kyogre. In addition to the 5 Single Strike Lugia in Day 2, there were 11 Colorless Lugia amongst the 177 Day 2 players. Colorless Lugia has been a known deck for a while now, but the addition of Mew EX has pushed it into real competitive viability. Charlie Kerr placed 18th as the top performing Colorless Lugia in Day 2. Colorless Lugia uses Snorlax as a strong single prize attacker, and backs it up with a few multi-prize attackers like Mew EX and Weirdeer V. Colorless Lugia's shaky Miraidon and Charizard matchups are likely the factors holding this archetype back from higher placements. The DTE variant of Mew VMAX, which does not play Fusion Strike Energy, came back in a big way this weekend with Rowan Stavanov's 3rd place finish. This deck was thought to be pretty bad in this format thanks to the Terra-type Dark Charizard EX being a popular threat. However, the innovation of Luxray V to be paired with Judge, Path to the Peak, and the new Grabber card proved to be a good game plan versus Charizard decks. Although Rowan only played against 2 Charizard decks and had a record of 1 win and 1 loss in the matchup, he reported that Luxray V was beneficial in other matchups as well. Tied for 6th place with DTE Mew is Turbo Lawson Box with 12 Day 2 placements. Jack Carter finished 2nd place with a fairly stereotypical list, with the count of 4 Super Rod and a Clara being the most unique thing to mention. Also notable is that Jack did not play a Drapion V, which was likely due to the consensus that Mew VMAX would be scared off by Charizard EX decks. Turbo Lawson is still incredibly strong due to the fast-paced spread damage from Sableye and Greninja, and strong attackers like Dragonite V and Raikou V that could be established out of nowhere thanks to Mirage Gate. Jack went 5 wins and 0 losses against Charizard EX decks without any specific techs in his list for the matchup, which was quite surprising to see. Just slightly more popular in Day 2 was Lawson Giratina V-Star, with 13 Day 2 players piloting it. The highest placing Lawson Tina was 30th place, piloted by Aaron West. This list included Spiritomb and Temple of Sinnoh, which can be considered techs for both Mew VMAX and Lugia V-Star, 2 of Lawson Tina's harder matchups. To give some context to the performance of the deck list and its techs, Aaron had a record of 1 win and 1 loss versus Lugia, and 1 win and 0 losses versus Mew VMAX. Chen-Pao Baxcalibur popped off this weekend with 17 players making it into Day 2 with the deck. Grant Shen was the highest placing Chen-Pao with a top 8 finish. The deck list Shen played has become known as Canadian Chen-Pao, and is largely considered the best way to play this combination of cards. Chen-Pao Baxcalibur is a pretty simple deck, which players deem to have high variance due to needing rare candy to bring Baxcalibur into play. Chen-Pao's skill expression comes in the form of good sequencing and micro decisions to increase odds and circumvent poor luck. Shen went undefeated against Charizard EX across both days of play, and Rahul Reddy, the 2nd highest placing Chen-Pao player, was undefeated against Charizard as well. Taking up more than 10% of the Day 2 field, there were 19 Miraidon EX Flaffy decks in Day 2. JW Krewall finished in 4th place with a newly reworked version of the deck, including 3 Path to the Peak for the Charizard EX matchup and 1 Mew EX as a new attacking option. Notably, JW and 5th place Jesse Parker did not include the new Zapdos EX in their lists, even after Champions League Yokohama was championed by a list playing both Zapdos and Mew EX. Zapdos EX was included in 3 of the 19 Miraidon EX Flaffy decks in Day 2, the highest being Aaron Tarbell at 49th place. JW took down a plethora of archetypes on his way to 4th place, before falling to the 2nd placed Turbo Lawson Box. At 14%, there were 25 Gardevoir EX decks in Day 2. Brett Tonneson came all the way over from Australia to farm a top 8 with his consistency-focused Gardevoir EX deck list, with notable card counts like 4 Ultra Ball and 4 Fog Crystals, with only 2 Rare Candy, comfortably accepting Mirage Step as a frequent turn 2 play. Brent included the new Mew EX into Gardevoir, which had been a topic of debate leading up to the weekend. 5 out of 25 Gardevoir decks in Day 2 played Mew EX. And finally, the most popular deck in both Day 1 and Day 2 was Charizard EX Pidgeot. Most players opted to not include Arceus V-Star, and this was also true for the highest placing Charizard EX deck piloted by Austin Daniels to 10th place. Austin stuck very close to the Curitiba winning list, not including Mew EX, and also not replacing NTV with Pidgeot V like many other players did this weekend. The highest placing Charizard EX Pidgeot, which included Arceus V-Star, was 61st place, so judging by placements alone, it seems to be correct to exclude Arceus V-Star from the deck at this point. One final look at the meta share for Day 2 of the Peoria Regional Championships. Charizard and Gardevoir being at the top was not a surprise to anyone who had been following along with the competitive metagame, but Chen-Pao and DTE Mew were interesting developments from the weekend. Don't forget to subscribe for more Pokemon TCG content, and check out ways to support my channel in the description down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.